He walked into that gala with another woman on his arm, and his wife was already waiting for him on stage. Not crying, not begging, not falling apart the way he always assumed she would. She was standing there in sapphire and diamonds, about to burn down everything he had spent 30 years building. And she was smiling. Dante Moretti had spent a decade believing he was the most dangerous person in any room he entered. He was wrong. He had simply never paid close enough attention to the woman who shared his bed, his name, and his silence. If you had been Vivienne, 10 years of being invisible, 10 years of being underestimated by the one person who was supposed to see you, what would you have done? Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome. Hit that subscribe button right now because the story you're about to hear is only the beginning. Leave a comment below telling me what city or country you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. And if it moves you, and I promise you, it will, hit that like button. You don't want to miss what comes next. Now, let's go back to where this really started. The night Vivienne Ashcroft Moretti decided she was done waiting, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind of rain that comes with thunder and lightning and signals that something important is about to happen. Just a quiet, steady, gray Tuesday rain that blurred the Manhattan skyline into watercolors outside the floor-to-ceiling windows of a penthouse that cost more than most people would earn in 3 lifetimes. The kind of rain that doesn't announce itself. It just arrives and keeps going, patient and relentless, until everything it touches is soaked through. She was sitting at the kitchen island when she heard him leave. She didn't hear a goodbye. She hadn't heard one in years. What she heard was the elevator chime, the faint mechanical hum of the doors closing, and then the particular quality of silence that only exists when you are completely and officially alone in a very large, very expensive, very empty space. Vivienne set down her coffee cup. She looked at her reflection in the darkened window across the room. A tall woman, early 40s, dark hair pulled back simply, wearing a cream silk robe that cost $800 and had been a gift she bought for herself because Dante had stopped noticing things like that around the 3rd year of their marriage. The woman in the reflection looked calm, composed. The way a still lake looks calm right before you realize there's no bottom to it. She picked up her phone. There was a text from her personal assistant, Catherine, sent 11 minutes ago. He's taking her to the Carrington Gala. Front row table. Press photographers confirmed. Vivienne read it twice. Then she set the phone face down on the marble countertop very slowly, the way you set something down when you are concentrating very hard on not throwing it through the window. The Carrington Gala. Her gala. The one she had helped co-found 14 years ago when she was still Vivienne Ashcroft, before she became Vivienne Moretti, before she let someone else's name swallow hers whole. The annual event that raised more money for underfunded arts programs in public schools than any other private foundation in the state of New York. The event where she still sat on the organizing committee, still wrote personal checks that kept certain programs alive. When the budget projections fell short, still showed up every single year because some things mattered to her regardless of what else was falling apart. He was taking Sienna Vale to her gala. Vivienne sat with that for a moment. She thought about Sienna Vale. 26 years old, beautiful, genuinely, in that uncomplicated way that youth makes everything look easy. A former finance associate at one of the firms Dante used for legitimate business laundering, because every crime family needed a legitimate face, and real estate investment groups made the cleanest one. Sienna had been in Dante's life for 14 months. Vivienne had known about her for 13 of those months. She had not said a word. Not because she was afraid of Dante. She had stopped being afraid of Dante Moretti somewhere around year 4, when she had quietly, methodically begun to understand exactly who and what she had married. Not because she was weak. Anyone who thought Vivienne Moretti was weak had made the same mistake her husband made, which was confusing silence with surrender. She had not said a word because she was not ready yet. But standing up, padding barefoot across the cold marble floor toward the closet where she kept the clothes Dante had never once commented on. The understated pieces, the classics, the things that never drew attention because she had spent years learning to not draw attention. Vivienne understood that ready had arrived. She pulled out the sapphire gown. It had been hanging there for 4 months, custom made. Worn by no one yet. She had commissioned it from a designer whose work she had quietly supported for 3 years through a foundation grant, a young woman from the Bronx who sewed like she was settling a debt with the universe. The gown was the deep blue of the Atlantic in January. Not a friendly color, not a warm color, the blue of something vast and cold and unmovable. She unzipped the garment bag. She didn't call anyone. She didn't pour herself a drink. She didn't stand in front of the mirror and give herself a speech. She simply began to get dressed, methodically, the way someone gets ready when they have been waiting a very long time for a specific moment, and they are not going to waste it on theatrics. Across the city, Dante Moretti was helping Sienna Vale out of a black Mercedes in front of the Carrington Hotel. He had a particular way of holding a woman's elbow when he walked into a room. Proprietary. Possessive. Not affectionate. Dante Moretti was not an affectionate man, had not been one since somewhere in his 30s when the business of being feared had slowly replaced most of the human impulses that fear tends to crowd out. He held Sienna's elbow the way he held a good bottle of scotch, like something expensive that belonged to him and that he was comfortable displaying. She was wearing red. She had asked him twice whether red was appropriate, and he had told her she looked stunning in anything, which was his way of saying he hadn't listened to the question. Sienna had been raised in a middle-class family in New Jersey, a family that kept their finances in one checking account and their secrets in plain sight. She was not naive about Dante. She knew what he was, in the way that people know what a lit match is while they're holding it. But she told herself that knowing the danger was the same as controlling it, which is a story people tell themselves right up until the moment they find out it isn't true. "How many people here know your wife?" she asked as they stepped through the gilded lobby doors. "Everybody knows her," Dante said, without adjusting his expression. "It doesn't matter." Sienna wanted to say it matters to me. She didn't. She was learning, slowly, that the things she wanted to say to Dante Moretti tended to stay inside her mouth. The ballroom of the Carrington was the kind of space that made you feel either very important or very small, depending on who you were when you walked into it. Crystal chandeliers that cost more to insure than most apartments. Circular tables dressed in white linen with centerpieces built around living orchids flown in from somewhere Sienna had never been and probably never would go. A stage at the far end with a podium and soft theatrical lighting, everything perfectly calibrated to make the people who stood in that spotlight look like they had always belonged there. Dante moved through the room with the ease of a man who has never genuinely feared social judgment. Handshakes, nods. 2 city councilmen. A federal judge who owed Dante 3 specific favors that were not the kind you discussed at charity galas. A hedge fund manager who had restructured debt for 2 of Dante's legitimate holding companies and asked no questions he didn't want answered. People smiled at Dante Moretti the way people smile at someone who has the power to hurt them. Wide. Fast. Eyes that stayed slightly too still. He didn't notice. Or rather, he had stopped distinguishing between genuine respect and performed respect years ago, because from a practical standpoint, they produced the same result. Sienna noticed. She noticed the way conversation shifted when Dante arrived, the way certain people became suddenly, carefully jovial, the way others excused themselves a few minutes earlier than they might have otherwise. She had grown up in a house where her father said what he meant, and her mother laughed at his jokes because she actually found them funny, and she was beginning to understand, in a way she was not yet ready to fully examine, that she had walked very far from that world. They took their seats, front table, just left of center, perfectly positioned to be seen. Sienna picked up her water glass and noticed her hand was slightly unsteady. She set it back down and told herself it was the heels. Vivienne arrived at the Carrington at 8:47 p.m. She came through the service entrance, not because she was hiding, but because she had arranged 3 specific things to happen in the next 90 minutes, and none of them could afford to be interrupted by Dante seeing her before the right moment. Catherine was waiting inside the east corridor with a tablet and an earpiece, and the particular expression of someone who has spent years being competent under pressure and has made peace with the fact that no one will thank them for it. "Everything's confirmed," Catherine said. "Chairwoman Leland is ready to revise the introduction. The foundation filing went through at 6 o'clock. It's official. And the document courier delivered to Hargrove and Associates at 8. Vivienne adjusted one earring. "The press?" 3 confirmed photographers inside. 2 more outside at the exit. Business Journal, Harker Media, and the Post Society desk all have their people here. "And Dante?" Catherine's expression didn't change. "Table 7, front left. He's been here 40 minutes. "And Sienna?" "With him." Vivienne said nothing for a moment, then, "Good." Catherine glanced at the sapphire gown. She had worked for Vivian for 11 years. She did not make personal comments, but her eyes said, "You look like something that's about to happen to someone," which was as close to a compliment as the evening required. "I need 20 minutes to call Marcus," Vivian said. "Then we're ready." She stepped into a side room, a small, unremarkable space used for event coordination, folding chairs stacked against one wall, a coffee machine that had seen better years. She sat in one of those chairs in her sapphire gown and her grandmother's earrings and dialed a number from memory. It rang 4 times. Vivian, Marcus Ashcroft's voice was 72 years old and still sounded like a courtroom. He was her father's brother, the man who had handed her the Ashcroft trust documents the week before her wedding, 23 years ago now, and said, "This is yours no matter what happens. Your father built it for you. Don't let anyone make you forget that." She had not forgotten. "It's tonight," she said. A pause. "You're certain?" He brought her to the Carrington Gala. Another pause, longer. "Ah." Something shifted in Marcus's voice. "Your mother's gala." "Yes." "Then yes," Marcus said quietly. "It's tonight." She didn't need his permission. He knew that. He said it anyway, because sometimes you need the people who have known you your whole life to witness the moment when you stop absorbing someone else's damage. "The lawyers?" "Standing by," Marcus said. "The moment you say the word." "I'll call you in 2 hours." She hung up, sat for a moment in the folding chair. Then she stood up, smoothed the sapphire gown, and walked back into the corridor where Catherine was waiting. "Let's go," she said. At table 7, Dante was on his second drink and his third conversation about a commercial real estate deal in the garment district that he found moderately interesting and Sienna found suffocating. She had smiled through all 3 conversations. Her face was beginning to ache in the specific way that faces ache when you've been performing an emotion for too long. She excused herself and walked toward the bar. Standing at the bar, waiting for a sparkling water she didn't particularly want, she overheard 2 women behind her, well-dressed, somewhere in their 60s, the kind of women who had attended every Carrington Gala for 20 years and knew its history better than the program notes. "I heard Vivian is here tonight." "Vivian Moretti?" "Vivian Ashcroft. She's going by Ashcroft again, apparently." A pause. "Tonight?" "That's what I heard from someone on the committee. Something's happening, something with the foundation." Sienna did not turn around. She accepted her sparkling water from the bartender and walked back toward table 7 with the particular careful posture of someone who has just heard something that has rearranged several assumptions they didn't realize they were making. "Dante," she said, sitting down. He was looking at his phone. He was always looking at his phone. "Is your wife here tonight?" He looked up. His eyes narrowed, not dramatically. Dante Moretti didn't do dramatic, but with the specific sharpening of a man who has a finely calibrated sense of when the ground is moving under him. "No," he said. "She doesn't come to these things anymore." "Are you certain?" The lights in the ballroom dimmed. The chairwoman's voice came through the speakers, warm and practiced, welcoming the assembled guests to the 31st annual Carrington Gala. Dante put his phone away with the movement of someone who has decided to table a question they don't like. Sienna looked toward the stage. Then she looked toward the main entrance. The spotlight moved, and there she was. The sound that moved through the Carrington ballroom when Vivian Ashcroft appeared in that doorway was not a gasp. It was more subtle than that, a collective shift in breath, the small involuntary noise that rooms full of people make when the atmosphere has just changed in a way that everyone feels before anyone processes it. She walked slowly, not hesitantly. She had not been hesitant about anything in years, maybe ever. Maybe hesitation was never really in her vocabulary, and marriage to Dante had simply confirmed that for her. She walked the way someone walks when they understand that every step is being watched, and they have long since made peace with being watched, and are now using it. The sapphire gown caught the light. Her posture was the posture of someone who had been told for 10 years that she existed to be decorative, and had decided, finally, to be decorative on her own terms for the last time, and then never again. She did not look at table 7. She was experienced enough to know that she didn't have to. Dante Moretti saw her. He saw her the way you see something you thought you had safely categorized suddenly behaving in a way that doesn't match the category. For one strange, unguarded moment, and Dante Moretti had very few unguarded moments. Something crossed his face that might have been recognition, not of Vivian specifically, of the feeling, the particular cold feeling of realizing you have misread something important. Sienna, beside him, went absolutely still. Vivian reached the stage. The chairwoman embraced her warmly. Not the obligatory embrace of formal events, but the embrace of two people who have known each other for years, and one of them has been waiting to be able to do this publicly for a long time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the chairwoman said, her voice carrying the unmistakable energy of someone who has been entrusted with a secret and is delighted to finally release it, "it is my extraordinary privilege to introduce the new chairwoman of the Ashcroft Global Foundation, whose founding endowment, announced tonight, exceeds $500 million. Ms. Vivian Ashcroft." The ballroom erupted. Not politely. Not in the measured way that expensive rooms full of careful people usually applaud. It erupted with the genuine, surprised force of a crowd that has just understood that something historic is occurring in front of them. Dante did not applaud. He sat completely still at table 7, a man watching a building fall that he had believed was his, and for the first time in longer than he could honestly remember, Dante Moretti did not know what to do next. At the podium, Vivienne placed both hands on the edges of the lectern. She looked out at the room. All those faces, politicians and judges and business people and society figures and journalists. The entire constellation of power that her husband had spent 30 years cultivating, every node in the network of influence and fear and money that had made Dante Moretti untouchable. She didn't look at him. She spoke. 14 years ago, she said, her voice clear and unhurried, my mother stood in a room like this one and wrote a check for programs she believed in, for children she would never meet, because she had been raised to believe that access to art was not a luxury. It was a right. She paused. I am here tonight because she was right, and because I have spent enough time being quiet about the things I believe in. A ripple in the room, something shifting. The Ashcroft Global Foundation will invest in 300 entrepreneurial ventures in its first year of operation. In technology, in renewable infrastructure, in financial education and access. Not because it's fashionable, because the people who built this country's wealth rarely looked like the people who needed it. I intend to change that. More applause. Louder this time. Vivian let it settle before she spoke again. I was asked recently, she said, and something in her voice changed, the way the sound of water changes when it goes from a river to a falls, why I chose tonight to make this announcement. A beat. I chose tonight because some decisions require a particular moment, and sometimes, she said carefully, that moment chooses itself. In the room, people who did not know the details of the Moretti marriage felt something nonetheless. The room had the feeling of a sentence that hasn't finished yet. Dante stood up from tables. His security team positioned at the perimeter moved, but before they could take 3 steps, the lead man, Garrett, who had worked Dante's personal protection for 6 years, received a phone call. He looked at his phone. He looked at Dante. Something in his expression changed. He stepped back. Because in the past 45 minutes, the legal structure of Dante Moretti's world had been quietly, precisely, and irreversibly rearranged. The businesses he believed he controlled, the legitimate holding companies, the real estate vehicles, the investment wrappers that laundered 30 years of organized crime into spreadsheets that looked like ordinary wealth. 63% of them were formally, legally documented assets of the Ashcroft Family Trust. Had been, in fact, for 9 years. Dante had signed the paperwork himself. He had simply never read it. He had trusted the lawyers who drew it up. He had not known those lawyers were Marcus Ashcroft's people. He had not known because he had looked at his wife and seen a woman who existed to stand beside him, and he had never looked again. Garrett put his phone away. He did not follow Dante toward the stage. Dante stopped. In the middle of that beautiful, glittering room, with every camera and every eye turned away from him and toward the woman at the podium, Dante Moretti stopped walking and stood absolutely alone in a crowd of 500 people, and understood, with a clarity that comes only once and is never comfortable, exactly what he had done and exactly what it had cost him. Vivian looked up from the podium. For the first time that evening, she looked directly at table 7. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply looked, steadily, for exactly 2 seconds. The look of someone who has been seen finally and no longer needs anything else from you. Then she looked back at the room. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm glad to be home." The applause was thunderous. Outside, rain was still falling on Manhattan, quiet and patient, the way rain falls when it has been falling long enough to know that eventually it reaches everywhere it intends to reach. At table 7, Sienna Vale sat alone with her sparkling water and her red dress, and the sinking, clarifying, irrevocable understanding that she had not been moving towards something when she walked into Dante Moretti's life. She had been standing very close to the edge of something, and the woman at the podium had just shown her exactly how far the drop was. The applause was still ringing off the crystal chandeliers when Dante Moretti turned and walked out of the Carrington ballroom. Not running. Dante Moretti did not run. But his stride had changed. That controlled, proprietary walk that had parted rooms for 30 years had something broken in its rhythm now, a half step off, the way a clock sounds when one of its gears has cracked, but hasn't stopped yet. The people he passed stepped aside, not because they respected him, not anymore, not tonight, but because a large, furious, humiliated man in an expensive suit still commands a certain primitive clearance. He hit the side corridor and the noise of the ballroom cut in half. His phone was already in his hand. He dialed his consigliere, Vincent Greco, a man he had known for 22 years, a man who had been present at his wedding and at the burial of 3 men who had made the mistake of crossing Dante in the early years. A man whose loyalty Dante had never once questioned because he had simply never thought about it long enough to question it. It rang 5 times. Vincent didn't pick up. Dante stared at the phone. He dialed again. 4 rings, voicemail. He lowered the phone slowly, and something in his chest did something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not fear exactly, but the premonition of fear, the shadow that arrives before the thing itself. He called his second-in-command, a man named Ray Costello, who handled the day-to-day coordination of the Moretti operation's legitimate business interests. Real estate, import logistics. 2 restaurant groups that lost money on paper and made money in ways that didn't appear on paper. Ray picked up on the second ring. "Boss." Ray's voice was careful, too careful. The careful of a man who has already heard something and is deciding how much of it to acknowledge. "What's happening?" Dante said. Not a question. A demand disguised as a sentence, a pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. There's some paperwork that came through tonight from a law firm, Hargrove and Associates." "What paperwork?" Boss, it's ownership documentation on the Vestry Street properties and the holdings inside the Meridian Group, LLC. Dante pressed his back against the corridor wall. The plaster was cool through his jacket. "Those are mine. The documentation says they belong to the Ashcroft Family Trust. And the filing dates," Ray stopped. "Say it." "The filing dates go back 9 years, boss. This isn't new. This has been in place for 9 years. Dante said nothing. In the ballroom, room 30 feet away, he could still hear applause. It had a different quality now, ongoing and layered, the kind of applause that feeds on itself when a room full of people decides it has witnessed something worth witnessing. "Get Vincent on the phone," Dante said. "I've been trying to reach Vincent for 40 minutes. Dante ended the call. He stood in the corridor of the Carrington Hotel in his $6,000 suit and listened to the applause for his wife Carrie through the walls of a building that was beginning to feel, in some cellular, pre-rational way, like it no longer belonged to the same world he had woken up in that morning. Back inside the ballroom, Sienna Vale had not moved from table 7. She was sitting with her hands folded on the tablecloth, her sparkling water untouched, her red dress suddenly feeling like a very loud choice in a room that had gone quiet in all the wrong ways. The 2 women she'd overheard at the bar had drifted past her table twice now, not stopping. But the second time, one of them had looked at Sienna with an expression that was not quite pity and not quite contempt, and was somehow worse than either. A man Sienna didn't recognize sat down across from her. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired, the kind of compose that comes from having been in difficult rooms for several decades. He set a glass of water in front of himself that she suspected he didn't intend to drink. "Ms. Vale," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know you." "My name is Marcus Ashcroft. I'm Vivian's uncle." Sienna felt something move through her that she would have called a chill if the room hadn't been perfectly temperature-controlled. "What do you want?" "Nothing from you," Marcus said pleasantly. "I want to offer you some information. What you do with it is entirely your own business. I think you should go. I think you should listen for 60 seconds, Marcus said, without changing his tone at all. After that, I'll leave, and we'll never need to speak again. Sienna picked up her sparkling water, took a sip, put it down. 60 seconds. Marcus folded his hands on the table with the unhurried patience of a man who had conducted 4 decades of legal strategy and found that patience was the sharpest instrument available. You've been with Dante Moretti for 14 months. In that time, 3 of the business accounts connected to his operation have paid expenses that include, among other things, 2 apartments, one on the Upper East Side, one in Tribeca, and a car lease registered in your name to an LLC you may not realize is directly connected to a federal inquiry that has been open for 11 months. The water glass felt suddenly very cold in Sienna's hand. I'm not suggesting you knew, Marcus continued. I'm suggesting you find out what you do and don't know before someone asks you about it in a context where not knowing is not a sufficient answer. He stood up, straightened his jacket. I hope you have a pleasant evening, Ms. Vale. He walked away. Sienna sat very still for a moment. Then she opened her phone and typed a name into a search engine she hadn't had reason to search before. Moretti Federal Investigation. The first result was from 6 months ago. The second was from 3 months ago. The third had been published 40 minutes earlier. Her hands were not steady anymore, and she was not going to blame the heels this time. Dante found his driver in the hotel's side lot and got into the back of the car without a word. He sat there in the dark for 4 minutes. He counted them, because counting gave his mind something mechanical to do while the rest of it dealt with what was happening. And then his phone buzzed. A text from a number he recognized as belonging to Carlo Esposito, one of his captains, a man who oversaw the Moretti family's arrangements in the Bronx and northern Manhattan. The text said, "We need to talk, not on the phone." Dante typed back, "Tomorrow morning." The response came in under 30 seconds. "It needs to be tonight." He stared at that for a long moment. Carlo Esposito had been with the Moretti organization for 16 years. In 16 years, he had never once told Dante something needed to happen tonight. Carlo was a patient man, methodical, the kind of man whose patience you trusted specifically because it was so consistent. Dante typed, "My office, midnight." He put the phone in his jacket pocket. Then he said, without looking at his driver, "Take me back inside." The driver, a young man named Paul, who had worked for Dante for 2 years and had learned to have absolutely no facial expression while doing so, put the car back in park. "Sir?" I said, "Take me back inside." Dante's voice was quiet, quietly quiet, which was the specific register that Paul had learned meant something worse than shouting. "Drive around to the front entrance. I'll walk in through the lobby." "Yes, sir." Dante had made a tactical error. He knew it now with the cold clarity that comes after adrenaline recedes and leaves only clear, unflattering light. He had walked out. Walking out, leaving the field, was something you did when you had already lost, and he had done it in front of 500 people who mattered, which meant they would all go home tonight and tell someone that Dante Moretti walked out. He could not undo that, but he could walk back in. Vivienne was standing with the chairwoman and 3 board members near the east side of the stage when Catherine appeared at her elbow with the specific presence she had when something required immediate, quiet attention. "He's coming back in," Catherine said, close to her ear. Vivienne didn't change her expression. She continued the conversation about the Foundation's first-year advisory board for exactly 12 more seconds, made a graceful transition, and excused herself. She and Catherine moved toward the outer edge of the room. "Where is he?" Vivienne asked. "Lobby. He'll be in the ballroom in under 2 minutes." Vivienne considered this. She had anticipated Dante leaving. She had not fully anticipated him coming back, which told her something. His ego was more intact than she had estimated, or his fear was sharper. Either way, it meant the same thing. He was going to try to reclaim the room, the narrative, the night. "Is Marcus still here?" "He just finished speaking with Ms. Vale." "Good." Vivienne glanced across the room. "Has anyone approached Sienna since then?" Catherine shook her head. "She's been on her phone. She looks—" Catherine chose a word with the precision of someone who doesn't waste them. "Shaken." "All right." Vivienne adjusted the sapphire strap at her shoulder. "Let him come in. Don't interfere. Don't let anyone from our side engage with him. If he approaches me, I'll handle it." "And if he makes a scene?" Vivian's eyes moved across the ballroom. The journalists, the photographers, the city councilman, the federal judge who still owed Dante 3 favors that were about to be re-examined in a very different context. Then we let the room handle it, she said. That's what rooms like this are for. Dante walked through the lobby of the Carrington with his chin up and his shoulders set, and the particular determined neutrality on his face of a man who is controlling every muscle individually because he cannot afford to let a single one go. The lobby staff paid him the professional non-attention of luxury hotel employees. The doors to the ballroom were attended by 2 young men in black who opened them without hesitation. He walked in. And the room, or the section of the room nearest the entrance, noticed. It was subtle. The same way the room had noticed Vivian's entrance, but with an entirely different frequency. When Vivian had entered, the room had gone bright, the way rooms go bright when something unexpected and magnificent appears in them. When Dante walked back in, the room went watchful, careful. The brightness concentrated somewhere else, and the space near the entrance became the kind of space people found reasons to be slightly farther from. He didn't go toward the stage. He was smarter than that. Instead, he moved toward a cluster of men he knew well, 3 of them, business contacts and political allies, men whose presence at his table over the years had meant something about the architecture of his power. He moved toward them naturally, as if returning to a conversation he had stepped away from momentarily. 2 of them saw him coming. One turned away first, just slightly, just enough to reorganize the angle of the group so that the natural opening for Dante to step into had narrowed. The second followed, the unconscious mirroring of social realignment happening in real time. The third, a man named Forsyth, a city budget director who had approved 3 significant zoning variances in Moretti-adjacent developments over the past 7 years, extended his hand with the sweat-damp enthusiasm of a man desperately hoping that looking loyal would protect him from something. Dante shook it. Dante. Forsyth's voice had too much warmth in it. Quite an evening. Quite an evening, Dante agreed. His voice was completely level. Your wife here tonight? Couldn't make it. She's... Forsyth gestured vaguely, the gesture of a man whose wife had definitely been invited and had definitely decided against attending. Give her my regards. Dante released his hand. He moved on. He passed a journalist he recognized, a man from one of the financial papers who had profiled him twice in the past decade, both flattering profiles, both built on information Dante had carefully curated and supplied. The journalist was speaking to a colleague and did not look up. Dante stopped. Marcus, he said. Loud enough. Deliberate. The journalist looked up. Something passed across his face. The calculation of a man whose job requires him to assess exactly how much proximity to a particular story is an asset versus a liability. Mr. Moretti, he said. Careful. Professional. Nothing more. Dante held his gaze for a moment, then he moved past. He reached the bar. He ordered a scotch, the good one. The one they kept on the top shelf and brought out without being asked when they knew who you were. And the bartender, a young woman who had served him at 4 previous Carrington events, made a small hesitation before she reached for it. A hesitation of maybe 1 second. Dante saw it. He took the drink without acknowledging it and stood with his back to the bar and looked out at the room. From here he could see the stage. Vivian was no longer at the podium. She was moving through the room now, working it with the ease of someone who has always known how to work a room but had simply been choosing, for reasons that were now very clear, not to. She stopped at a table of 3 women in their 60s, arts board members, Dante vaguely registered. And something she said made all 3 of them laugh with genuine, unguarded delight. He watched his wife move through a room that was opening for her the way rooms used to open for him. The scotch was good. He drank half of it in one go. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Ray Costello again. Boss. The Delancey Street warehouse. The lease is in the Meridian Group. We just found out Meridian is under the Ashcroft Trust. There may be a problem with what we were storing there. Dante's fingers tightened around the glass. He typed, handle it. The reply, it's already been accessed. Someone came in with legal documentation 2 hours ago. Everything in Storage Unit 4 and Storage Unit 7 has been inventoried by a third party. He stared at those words. Storage Unit 4 contained documents. Specifically, financial routing records that were not the kind of records you wanted inventoried by anyone, for any reason, under any circumstances. Storage Unit 7 contained something worse. Dante set the scotch glass down on the bar. He turned and walked toward the far corner of the room where there was a secondary exit he had used before. Discreet, rarely watched, the kind of exit that luxury venues provide for guests who need to leave without the lobby. I was 6 feet from it when someone stepped into his path. Not aggressively, not with any display of force. The man was in his early 40s, lean, wearing a suit that fit well enough to be invisible in this room, and he had the particular quality of stillness that Dante had learned to recognize over 30 years as belonging to federal law enforcement. "Mr. Moretti," the man said quietly, "my name is Special Agent Daniel Reeves. I'd like to have a brief conversation." Dante looked at him. "Am I being detained?" "No, sir. This is completely voluntary." "Then I'm leaving." "Of course," Agent Reeves said and stepped aside. "I'll be in touch." Dante walked through the exit. The night air hit him, cold, rain damp, the street smell of Manhattan at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. A car was waiting. Not his car, he realized immediately. Not Paul's Mercedes, but a different car, a black sedan he didn't recognize, parked exactly where his car should have been. He pulled out his phone to call Paul. Paul picked up on the first ring. "Boss, I'm sorry. There was a situation. Someone from hotel management said I couldn't park in the side lot and I had to move." "Where are you?" 3 blocks south. I'm coming around now." Dante stood on the sidewalk in the rain outside the Carrington Hotel, alone, with a federal agent standing somewhere behind the door he'd just come through, and waited for his car with rain spotting the shoulders of his $6,000 suit, and thought for the first time in 30 years that he was not entirely certain what happened next. It was the worst feeling he had ever had. Inside, Sienna had made a decision. She was leaving. She had picked up her clutch and her wrap, and she was leaving, and she was not going to wait for Dante to come back to the table, and she was not going to have the conversation she could feel, waiting for her at the end of this evening, like a wall she had been walking toward for 14 months without fully acknowledging it was there. She was almost at the lobby when Vivian appeared beside her, not blocking her, not confronting her, simply appearing the way that very deliberate people can appear, as if they were always going to be in exactly this place at exactly this time. "Ms. Vale," Vivian said. Sienna stopped. She turned. Up close, Vivian Ashcroft was not what Sienna had expected. She had constructed an image of her, over 14 months of deliberate non-thinking about her, of someone older and softer and dimmer, a woman who had retreated from a difficult marriage into the comfortable numbness of money and irrelevance. What stood in front of her was none of those things. The woman in front of her was sharp-edged and clear-eyed, and entirely, uncomfortably present. "I don't want trouble," Sienna said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt, which was something at least. "I know," Vivian said. "I'm not here to give you any." A pause. "Then why—" "Because you're 26 years old," Vivian said simply, "and there are things you don't know that you should know before morning." Sienna looked at her. "Like what?" "The LLC that holds your apartment lease. The one Dante told you was a business arrangement." Vivian's voice was not unkind. It was precise. The kind of precise that comes from having rehearsed something until the emotion has been removed and only the information remains, because the information is what the other person actually needs. "It was registered improperly. There's a federal inquiry. Your name is in 3 documents that were filed without your knowledge and without anything you would recognize as consent." She paused. "You need a lawyer, tonight." Sienna felt the lobby floor do something unsteady beneath her heels. "How do you know this?" she asked. "Because I've spent 9 years paying attention to the things my husband assumed no one was watching." Vivian reached into the small evening bag she carried and produced a business card. She held it out. "This is an attorney, not connected to anything Ashcroft or Moretti. She's independent. She's excellent. You can call her tonight." Sienna looked at the card. She didn't take it for a moment. "Why would you help me?" she asked. The question came out raw, stripped of the careful social texture she'd been maintaining all evening. Vivian considered her. "I'm not helping you. I'm making sure you have information that's yours to have. What you do with it is your own business." She set the card on the small lobby side table between them, rather than pressing it into Sienna's hand. "I hope you have a safe drive home." She turned and walked back toward the ballroom. Sienna stared at the card on the table for a full 10 seconds. Then she picked it up. Midnight arrived at Dante's office building on the 44th floor of a glass tower in Midtown, and with it arrived Carlo Esposito. Carlo was 53, heavy-set in the way of a man who had been physically imposing in his 30s and had let it drift, but not disappear. He had a face that had always looked slightly older than it was, which Dante had once thought was a sign of gravitas. Tonight it looked like what it probably was, the face of a man who had been carrying too much for too long. He sat down across from Dante's desk without being invited to, which was itself a thing. Dante noted it. He noted it and filed it and kept his face even. "Talk," he said. Carlo looked at the desk, then at Dante. His jaw moved once before any sound came out, the mouth's equivalent of a false start. "The captains had a call this afternoon, before the gala." "Without me?" "Yes." The word sat between them. "Who organized it?" Dante said. "Mickey Farrow." Mickey Farrow was one of Dante's longest-standing captains. He controlled the port operations, the docking arrangements, the customs relationships, the particular set of agreements with longshoremen's union officials that had made the Moretti family's import logistics invisible for 20 years. "Mickey Farrow organized a call with the captains," Dante said, "without my knowledge this afternoon, and you are telling me about it now at midnight. Walk me through the sequence of choices that led to that." Carlo's jaw moved again. "I wanted to tell you in person, not on the phone." "I appreciate that," Dante said. His voice had gone very flat. "Tell me everything that was said." Carlo told him. It took 11 minutes. Carlo spoke without his eyes meeting Dante's for more than a second or two at a time. Not from guilt exactly, or not only from guilt, but from the discomfort of someone who has had to bring genuinely terrible news to a person with genuine power and has never fully developed the immunity that would make it easier. The substance of what had been said on the call among the captains that afternoon was this. The news about the Ashcroft Trust ownership structure, which had begun leaking through attorney networks and financial contacts before the gala even started, had raised serious questions about the stability of the Moretti organization's foundation. Specifically, about how much of what they believed Dante owned was actually under his control. And without ownership, what exactly were they pledging loyalty to? Mickey Farrow had been clear about his position. A boss who doesn't control his own assets isn't a boss. It's a man with a good suit and a very large problem. 3 of the 7 captains on the call had not objected. Dante sat with this for a long moment after Carlo stopped talking. The office was quiet. The kind of quiet at midnight in a midtown high-rise that is made of the absence of all the daytime noise rather than any genuine peace. 3, Dante said. 3 stayed quiet. The others said they need time to understand what the legal situation actually is. And Mickey. Carlo met his eyes for the first time. Mickey said the organization needed to consider its options. The word options was not a complicated word. In the context of a criminal organization discussing a weakened leadership position, it meant exactly one thing, and both men in the room understood that without it needing to be said. Dante stood up from his desk. He walked to the window. 44 floors up, Manhattan was a gridwork of light stretching to the edges of everything, the rivers catching reflections, the bridges like stitches across dark water. He had looked at this view from this office for 11 years, and it had always looked like territory, like something that acknowledged him. It looked like a city tonight, just a city, full of people who didn't know his name or fear it or care. "Carlo," he said, without turning from the window. "Yeah. You've been with me a long time. 22 years. In 22 years, have I ever let something fall that I didn't mean to let fall?" Carlo thought about this with the seriousness it deserved. "No," he said, "you haven't." "Then I need you to trust me for 48 hours. Dante turned from the window. His face was composed again. Not the old composed, not the composure of a man who has never doubted himself, but something more effortful and therefore more visible. 48 hours. Don't let Mickey move without calling me first. Can you do that?" Carlo looked at him for a long moment. "I can try," he said. It was not the answer Dante had wanted, but it was an honest one, and honest answers from men like Carlo were becoming rare enough that he took it. "Go home," Dante said. "Get some sleep." Carlo left. Dante stood alone in his office at 44 floors, looking at a city that had belonged to him at midnight for 15 years, and thought about the document room in the Delancey Street warehouse, and about Storage Unit 7, and about a federal agent who had known his name and where he would be exiting the building tonight, and about his wife standing on a stage accepting applause from everyone who mattered while he stood outside in the rain. He opened his laptop. He typed a name into a secure messaging application he used for communications that couldn't go through normal channels. The name was Leonard Hatch. Leonard Hatch was a man who solved specific kinds of problems. He was not cheap. He was not gentle. He had solved 4 problems for Dante in the past decade, and in each case the problem had not reappeared. Dante typed, "I need to talk. Tonight." He waited. The response took 3 minutes, which was long for Leonard Hatch. "I can't." 2 words, no punctuation. Dante stared at them. He typed, "I'm not asking." Leonard's reply came back in under a minute this time, and it was longer than 2 words. And what it said, what it laid out with the flat, unapologetic clarity of a man who has calculated that the situation has changed and acted accordingly, was that Leonard Hatch had received a call that afternoon from a legal representative of the Ashcroft Family Trust, which had documentation of 2 of the 4 problems Leonard had solved for Dante, and that Leonard was not in a position to discuss those problems or any future arrangements, and that Dante should consider this message their final communication. Dante closed the laptop. He sat in his office chair and pressed both hands flat against the desk surface, the solid, real, physical weight of the wood under his palms. And he breathed, in, out. He was not a man who panicked. Panic was something he had excised from himself in his 20s through a series of experiences that had required him to either master the emotion or be destroyed by it. He had mastered it. It had been one of his genuine achievements, and it had served him for 30 years. But what was happening now was not a crisis he could outlast through stillness. Vivienne had not simply humiliated him at a charity gala. She had spent 9 years building the architecture of his destruction, piece by piece, quietly, while he poured scotch and took meetings and slept next to her on a mattress that cost $12,000, and never once asked himself what she was thinking. She had the properties. She had the financial documentation. She had access to the warehouse records, which meant she had or was about to have the contents of Storage Unit 7. She had turned Leonard Hatch. She had been preparing for a federal inquiry that was already open, and she had done all of it from inside his house, using his lawyers, his accountants, his infrastructure, his assumptions about who she was. He had built an empire on the idea that he was the most dangerous person in any room. He had been wrong every single day for 9 years, and he had been too busy being certain of himself to notice. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize, no name attached. It said, "Storage Unit 7 has been transferred to federal custody as of 11:58 p.m. tonight under warrant. Thought you should know before morning." He didn't know who sent it. A warning from someone still loyal, maybe. Or a demonstration from someone who wasn't. It didn't matter. What was in Storage Unit 7 was now in federal hands. Dante Moretti put his phone face down on the desk of the office he might not have access to by the end of the week. And for the first time since he was a young man standing at the beginning of everything he intended to build, he had no next move ready. The rain outside the 44-floor window had not stopped. It had simply kept going, patient as it always was, reaching everything it intended to reach. He sat at that desk until 3 in the morning, not thinking, exactly. Dante Moretti had always been a man of action over reflection, had always trusted the instinct that told him to move before it told him why, and the instinct right now was simply freeze, which was not an instinct he recognized in himself, and therefore did not know what to do with. He sat with his hands on the desk and the closed laptop in front of him, and the rain against the glass, and the text from an unknown number sitting somewhere in his phone like a splinter he couldn't reach. Storage Unit 7 was in federal hands. He kept coming back to that. Not because of what it meant for his legal exposure. He had lawyers for legal exposure, expensive ones. Lawyers who had earned their fees across 3 decades of keeping Dante Moretti's name out of courtrooms. The lawyers could work. The lawyers were good at what they did. But the lawyers had never seen what was in Storage Unit 7. Nobody had. Nobody except Dante. and the two men who had helped him put it there. And one of those men was no longer alive in a way that involved ongoing conversation, and the other one was a 61-year-old former soldier named Thomas Ruiz, who lived in a row house in Yonkers and had not spoken directly to Dante in 4 years by mutual, unspoken arrangement. The contents of Storage Unit 7 were not financial records. They were not routing documents or bribery ledgers, or anything that could be managed through the controlled demolition of a business structure. They were personal. They were specific. They were the kind of evidence that didn't lead to financial penalties and asset forfeiture. They led somewhere else entirely. At 3:14 in the morning, Dante picked up his phone and called the one lawyer he had never needed to call at 3 in the morning before, a woman named Patricia Sewell, who had been practicing criminal defense for 38 years and had a reputation for never, under any circumstances, allowing panic into a room where she was working. She picked up on the third ring. Her voice was alert. She had either been awake or she was one of those people who woke instantly, no transition, which Dante suspected. Dante. Not surprised. Maybe nothing surprised Patricia Sewell anymore after 38 years. "I need you in my office at 7 a.m., he said. "Not your office. Mine." A pause of approximately 2 seconds. "All right. And Patricia?" He stopped. "Yes." Storage Unit 7 on Delancey went into federal custody tonight at 11:58. A longer pause this time. He could hear her breath, not alarmed breath, just the breath of someone absorbing information and sorting it simultaneously. "Do they have a full inventory?" "I don't know." "Do you know who tipped the warrant?" Dante looked at the rain on the glass. "I have a reasonable theory." "Then don't tell me the theory on this line," Patricia said. 7 a.m. She hung up. Dante lowered the phone. He thought about Vivian. He thought about the 9 years she had moved through his life with the quiet patience of someone who was building something he couldn't see, and he tried to reconstruct the timeline. When she must have started, what moment she had reached that had turned from endurance into strategy. He couldn't find it. He couldn't find the seam, which meant the seam had been there from the beginning, or close enough to the beginning that the distinction didn't matter. I thought about the first year of their marriage, when he had still believed that the Ashcroft name and the Moretti operation could be genuinely separate things, compartments that didn't touch. When he had still believed that Vivian was what she appeared to be, a woman of considerable inherited wealth and considerable personal elegance who had married him because she found him powerful and interesting. He thought about the night she had asked him, somewhere in the third year, what was in the Meridian Group LLC that he was so careful about keeping out of the quarterly reports. He had told her it was boring infrastructure business, and she had said, of course, and gone back to reading whatever she was reading, and he had felt the satisfaction of a man who has managed the information in his household correctly. He understood now that she had asked the question already knowing the answer. She had been filing the information, categorizing it, building a structure he was too certain of himself to notice being built around him. He stood up from the desk. He went to the window again and stood there, and this time he didn't look at the city. He looked at his own reflection in the dark glass. A man in a good suit who was going to turn 61 in March, whose hair had gone silver at the temples sometime in his early 50s, in a way that his barber and various people with reasons to flatter him had called distinguished. He looked at this man and tried to locate the thing that had made him believe, without ever seriously examining the belief, that he was protected. He found it. It was not intelligence. It was not power. It was not the organization or the money or the lawyers. It was the assumption that certain people didn't have the capability to threaten him. People he had categorized, his wife, his home, the domestic space he had never imagined as a battlefield because battlefields were somewhere else, somewhere he controlled, and home was just where he slept. He had been sleeping in the enemy's house for 9 years. At 6:45 the next morning, Vivian was already awake and working. She was at the desk in her private study. Not the bedroom, not the kitchen where she'd sat the night before, but the room that Dante had believed for a decade was simply where she wrote personal correspondence and organized charity committee materials. A room with pale gray walls and built-in shelving, and a window that looked east, and a locked drawer in the desk that Dante had never asked about because it had never occurred to him to wonder what she kept in it. Catherine arrived at 6:50 with coffee and a tablet. "Legal confirmed the Delancey transfer went through," she said, setting the coffee at Vivian's elbow. "Federal intake processed at 12:06 a.m. Marcus's contact says the inventory team will begin cataloging this morning. Vivian nodded once. She was looking at a spreadsheet on her laptop. Not financial data, but a timeline, a long one. Dates and events and corresponding documentation references. The architecture of 9 years made visible in a single document. How did he look when he left? She asked. Catherine considered the question honestly, which was what Vivian paid her for. Like someone who understood for the first time that he didn't know something he should have known. That's what I expected. Vivian turned a page in the folder beside her laptop. And Sienna? She called the attorney at 12:30 a.m. The attorney confirmed the call to our liaison this morning. She's cooperating. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She's frightened. Yes. Make sure the attorney knows that. She looked up from the spreadsheet. She's not a target. She was a variable he used. There's a difference. Catherine noted this without writing it down, which was how she noted the things that mattered most. One more thing, Catherine said, and something in her voice had changed. Not alarm, but the quality of a person introducing a subject they have been thinking carefully about how to introduce. Vivian looked at her fully. The call between the captains yesterday afternoon, Catherine said. Marcus's contact inside the organization, the one who's been providing structural information for the past 3 years. What about him? Catherine set the tablet on the desk and turned it to face Vivian. On the screen was a photograph. Taken last night, time-stamped 11:23 p.m., outside a restaurant 12 blocks from the Carrington. 2 men at a sidewalk table. One of them was Mickey Farrow, Dante's port operations captain, a heavy-set man in his early 60s whom Vivian knew by sight from a dozen organization events over the years. The other man was Vincent Greco, Dante's consigliere, the man who had not answered his phone when Dante called from the Carrington corridor, the man who had been with Dante for 22 years. Vivian looked at the photograph for a long time. When was this sent to you, she asked. 40 minutes ago, from Marcus's contact. And Marcus's contact is Vincent Greco, Catherine said. The study was very quiet for a moment. Vivian sat back in her chair slowly, the way someone moves when they are recalibrating something significant. She had known that Vincent was passing information. She had known for 14 months. She had known it and used it and been grateful for it, and she had filed it under the category of men who have been loyal to the wrong person for too long and have finally decided to change the calculation. What she had not known, what the photograph made suddenly, uncomfortably clear, was that Vincent was also meeting with Mickey Farrow, not reporting to Marcus's network, meeting privately. At 11 p.m. the night everything changed, after the gala, after Dante walked out of the Carrington in the rain. What does Marcus think? Vivian asked. Marcus thinks Vincent may be running 2 conversations simultaneously, Catherine said, feeding us information to manage us, feeding Mickey Farrow information to position himself for whatever the organization looks like after... She stopped. After Dante's gone, Vivian said. Yes. Vivian looked at the photograph again. Vincent Greco's face, a face she had seen across dinner tables and at formal events, and in the peripheral vision of 23 years of marriage, was relaxed in the photograph. He was not a man having a tense conversation. He was a man who believed he was in control of the terrain he was walking on. How much does he know? Vivian asked. About our timeline, about the federal peace. Catherine's pause told her everything before the words did. Potentially significant. He had access to the scheduling conversations through Marcus's network. We assumed his access was information flow one direction. But he's been managing the flow, Vivian said. We think so. Yes. Vivian closed the folder on her desk. This was the part she had not prepared for. Not because she had been careless. She had not been careless. She had been meticulous. She had spent 9 years being meticulous. But because she had made an assumption. She had assumed that a man who turned on Dante Moretti after 22 years was turning towards something. Safety, maybe, or self-preservation, or some belated instinct toward the right side of a legal situation. She had not fully allowed for the possibility that Vincent Greco was not turning toward anything, that he was simply repositioning, trading one power structure for the chance to stand closer to the next one. She had made exactly the kind of assumption about Vincent that Dante had made about her. The irony of this landed without softness. Pull everything we shared with Marcus that went through Vincent's access, she said. I need to know exactly what he has. I've already started, Catherine said. Patricia Sewell arrived at Dante's office at 6:58, which was 2 minutes early, which was how Patricia Sewell operated in situations she had assessed as serious. She was 70 years old and looked 60 and moved like someone who had long ago stopped caring about anything except the work. Gray suit. No jewelry except small gold earrings. A briefcase she had been carrying for 20 years because it had exactly the right number of compartments, and she did not see any reason to change a system that functioned correctly. She sat down across from Dante's desk and opened the briefcase and took out a legal pad and said, "Tell me what's in storage unit 7. Dante looked at her. That's not how I usually... Dante. Her voice was not unkind. It was the voice of someone who has had this particular conversation in its various forms for 38 years. I have defended 11 men who went to prison in part because they spent the first critical hours after a federal action telling me what they thought I needed to know rather than everything I actually needed to know. We don't have time for that version of this conversation. Tell me what's in storage unit 7. He told her. It took 9 minutes. He did not look at her while he told her. He looked at the desk, at his hands on the desk, at the Manhattan skyline coming pale and gray out of the overnight rain behind the glass. He spoke in a flat, factual voice, the voice of someone who has decided that the only way through is through and is not going to allow themselves the comfort of softening the facts. Patricia did not write anything on her legal pad while he spoke. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, a considered, working quiet. Not shocked. Patricia Sewell did not appear to shock easily, but the quiet of someone adding a new element to a structure they had been building in their head and revising the structural assessment accordingly. How many people know the full content of what was in that unit? She asked. Me. Thomas Ruiz. Thomas Ruiz is in Yonkers. Yes. Has he been contacted by anyone in the last 48 hours to your knowledge? Not to my knowledge. We need to reach him before anyone else does, Patricia said. Today. I know. And Vivian. Patricia said the name evenly, the way you say the name of a factor in a calculation. You believe she tipped the federal warrant. The timing is suggestive, Patricia agreed. It is not conclusive. I need to know how she would have known what was in that unit. Dante was quiet. Dante. I may have mentioned... He stopped, pressed his lips together, started again. There was a conversation several years ago. I'd had too much to drink. It was late. I said something. I didn't give her specific details, but He stopped again. Patricia Sewell looked at him with the expression of someone who has just watched a very large, carefully constructed argument collapse from its foundation. You gave her enough, she said. It was not a question. Yes, Dante said. Patricia wrote something on her legal pad. Underlined it, set the pen down. Here is what we are dealing with, she said. The federal inquiry that has been open for 11 months is not, as your other attorneys have been managing it, primarily about financial restructuring or tax arrangement irregularities. Based on what you've just told me, the inquiry is using the financial case as a vehicle. What they actually want is connected to what was in that unit. She paused, which means the inquiry was built on a tip that is older than the warrant, probably much older. Dante felt something shift in his chest. How much older? I'd estimate the original tip predates the formal inquiry by at least 2 years, possibly 3. She looked at him. Someone has been feeding this case for a long time, Dante. Not just last night. Last night was a delivery. The foundation was built years ago. He sat with this. Vincent, he said. Patricia tilted her head. What about Vincent? He didn't pick up when I called last night. First time in 22 years he's... Dante stopped. Something was happening in his face. Not an expression exactly, but the dissolution of several assumptions simultaneously, visible in the way certain muscles go slack when the information they were holding no longer applies. Vincent was my consigliere. Yes. He had access to everything, every structure, every arrangement, every conversation I had in my own office for 22. He stopped again. How long has Vincent Greco had a reason to be dissatisfied? Patricia asked. Vincent has never been dissatisfied. Every man has a reason, Patricia said. You may not have been paying attention to what his was. Dante thought about Vincent Greco for a long moment. 22 years. The wedding, the burials, the handshakes at midnight in locations that didn't have names, the loyalty that had always been present so consistently that Dante had stopped actively registering it the way you stop registering the sound of your own refrigerator. I thought about 3 years ago when Vincent had asked, carefully, deferentially, in the way that Vincent did everything, about the possibility of a formal elevation in the organizational structure, a recognition of his role that went beyond function, something official. Dante had told him his role was already understood by everyone who mattered. He had not revisited the conversation. He had not thought about Vincent again in connection with that conversation. He was thinking about it now. Find out what Vincent has been doing for the past 3 years, Dante said. Patricia nodded. I'll need the name of someone inside your organization who is not connected to Vincent and whose loyalty you are certain of. Dante almost said Carlo's name. He stopped himself. He thought about Carlo sitting across from him at midnight saying, I can try when asked to keep Mickey Farrow from moving. I can try. Not yes. Not of course. The hedge of a man who is either genuinely uncertain of his ability to control a situation or who is managing 2 conversations simultaneously. Dante looked at Patricia. I'll get back to you on that, he said. Patricia Sewell looked at him with the careful, unillusioned eyes of a woman who has sat across from powerful men in catastrophic situations for 38 years. Dante, she said, I need you to hear what I'm about to say. Say it. You have spent 30 years building a structure on the assumption that your authority was self-sustaining, that it didn't require active maintenance because it was simply understood. She paused. What you are describing to me this morning suggests that the structure has been undermined from multiple directions over multiple years and that you did not see it because you were not looking. Another pause. That is not a legal problem. The legal problems are significant, and we will address them. But the reason they are as serious as they are is not legal. It is personal. Do you understand what I'm saying? Dante was quiet. You trusted the wrong people, Patricia said, and you did not trust the right ones. The question this morning is not how to fight your way back to what you had. The question is whether you understand that what you had is gone, and what you do with the territory that's left. Dante stood up from his desk. He walked to the window. For the 3rd time in 12 hours, he looked at the city from a high window in the rain and tried to find in it something that looked like his. He looked for longer this time. I understand, he said finally. But his voice, Patricia Sewell noted as she closed her legal pad, sounded like a man who was saying he understood because he knew that was the answer, not because he had yet found the place inside himself where understanding actually lived. At 9:37 a.m., Vivian's private cell phone rang with a number she did not recognize. She answered it, which she did not always do with unrecognized numbers, but something, an instinct she had learned to trust, a frequency she had developed over years of paying attention when other people weren't, told her to pick up. Ms. Ashcroft. A man's voice. Careful. Deliberate. The voice of someone who has chosen every word in advance. Speaking. My name is Vincent Greco. Vivian sat very still. I believe we should meet, Vincent said. Why would we do that? Vivian said. Her voice gave him nothing. Because I have information that affects your timeline, he said. Specifically, information about the federal inquiry that you may not have accounted for. And because, he paused, with the pause of a man deploying a card he has been holding back. Because I know about Thomas Ruiz. The study was absolutely silent. Vivian's hand on the phone did not move. Her breathing did not audibly change. Her face, had anyone been there to see it, showed the specific quality of someone who has just encountered an unexpected piece of information and is refusing, on principle, to show that they have. I see, she said. I've been very useful to your uncle's network, Vincent said. I believe I can be useful to you directly, without the intermediary. You've been useful to my uncle, Vivian said carefully, and simultaneously meeting with Mickey Farrow. A pause, shorter than she expected. You know about that. I know about several things, she said. Another pause. Then something shifted in Vincent Greco's voice, not quite respect, but the recalibration of someone who has just been reminded that the person he's negotiating with is not operating with less information than he assumed. Then you know, he said, That Mickey Farrow is planning to move against the organization's leadership within the next 72 hours, and that his primary concern right now is not Dante. He paused. It's you. Vivian set the phone down on her desk without ending the call. She looked at the photograph still on Catherine's tablet. Vincent Greco and Mickey Farrow at the sidewalk table, relaxed, the body language of men building something together. She picked the phone back up. What does Mickey Farrow want with me? She said. Not a question, a testing of information. You control 63% of the asset structure that the organization runs on, Vincent said. Mickey is not interested in loyalty or legacy or organizational philosophy. Mickey is interested in operational continuity. If the Moretti name is finished, and it is, Ms. Ashcroft, it is finished, I think you know that better than anyone, then whoever controls the assets controls what comes next. He thinks I'll negotiate with him, Vivian said. He thinks he can pressure you into it, Vincent said. There's a difference. How does he intend to apply the pressure? Vincent's answer came out quiet and flat. The flatness of a man delivering information he knows will land hard and is not pretending otherwise. Thomas Ruiz, he said. Mickey has people in Yonkers, has had them there since yesterday evening. He has been waiting to see how the federal situation develops before he decides what to do with that particular piece of leverage. The room was quiet again. Vivienne closed her eyes for exactly 3 seconds. Behind her closed eyes, the timeline she had spent 9 years building was running forward at high speed. Every decision, every document, every carefully measured step, and at the end of the timeline, in the place where she had calculated a clean exit, a controlled demolition, a conclusion that was hers to write. At the end of it now stood a 61-year-old man in a row house in Yonkers with Mickey Farrow's people parked somewhere on his street. Thomas Ruiz was nobody to her. He was a man she knew only by the role he had played in something she had learned about through documents and had used as leverage without expecting it to become something else, something that breathed and lived on a specific street and could be reached. She opened her eyes. Mr. Greco, she said, if I agree to meet with you, I need to understand what you actually want, not what you're offering, what you want. I want to be on the right side of what's coming, Vincent said. I've spent 22 years on the wrong side of it. I'm 60 years old. I am not interested in spending the next chapter of my life waiting for a man like Mickey Farrow to decide I've outlived my usefulness. That's a reason to be afraid of Mickey Farrow, Vivian said. That's not a reason to come to me. The reason to come to you, Vincent said, is that you're the only person I've encountered in 30 years in this world who planned far enough ahead to be in the position you're in right now, and the only person who has the capacity to neutralize Mickey before he decides that Thomas Ruiz is worth more as a problem than as a solution. Vivian stood up from her desk. She walked to the window of the study and looked east at the morning that had come up pale and washed out after the rain, the wet gray light that New York wore in the aftermath of a storm. The city looking clean in the way that things look clean when you know the dirt is still there under the surface, waiting. She had planned for Dante. She had planned for the federal inquiry, for the asset restructuring, for the legal architecture of a divorce that was not going to be a divorce in any ordinary sense, but the controlled, documented dismantling of 30 years of criminal enterprise dressed up as a marriage. She had planned for Sienna Vale, for the public humiliation, for the moment in the ballroom when the cameras turned and Dante Moretti became invisible. She had not planned for Thomas Ruiz to become a living vulnerability. She had not planned for Mickey Farrow to think laterally rather than directly. She had not planned for Vincent Greco to be running 3 conversations simultaneously and come to her as a 4th. She was not, she told herself very quietly, going to panic. But for the first time in 9 years, Vivian Ashcroft was standing at the edge of a plan that had developed a crack she had not put there herself, and on the other side of the crack was a 61-year-old man in Yonkers, and the possibility that everything she had built could be used against her by a man who had not been in her calculations at all. Where do you want to meet? She said. Vincent gave her an address. She memorized it without writing it down, ended the call, and stood at the window for a long moment with the phone in her hand and the morning light coming through the glass, and the specific weight of a plan that had just become something larger and more dangerous than the one she had started with 9 years ago in this house, with this name, beside a man who never looked closely enough to see her. She had come this far by being patient. She was going to have to be something else now. She called Catherine. I need a car, she said. Unmarked. And I need Marcus on the phone in 10 minutes. Where are you going? Vivienne looked at her reflection in the window. Not the sapphire gown now, just a woman in gray morning clothes with her hair loose, looking back at herself with the eyes of someone who has just understood that the game she was playing had added new players while she was focused on the ones she already knew. Finish this, she said. But even as she said it, she knew that what she was actually going to do was something harder than finishing it. She was going to have to change the ending she had written. The car Catherine arranged was a gray Honda Civic with 80,000 miles on it and a pine air freshener that had long since stopped smelling like pine. Vivienne sat in the back seat and did not think about the sapphire gown or the applause or the moment at the podium when the room had turned toward her like a field of sunflowers finding the light. That was last night. Last night was already a different country. Marcus had taken 7 minutes to answer her call, which meant he had been asleep, which meant he was human after all. Vincent Greco called me directly, she said when he picked up. 3 seconds of silence. That shouldn't have been possible. He had my number, Marcus. I didn't give him your number. I know you didn't. She watched Manhattan move past the window. The morning version of the city, delivery trucks and early commuters, and the particular gray-yellow light of a day that hasn't decided yet what kind of day it intends to be. Someone in your network did. Or he found it another way. Either way, he has it, and he used it, and he told me about Thomas Ruiz. The silence this time was different, heavier. Marcus, did you know Mickey Farrow had people in Yonkers? No. The word came out flat and immediate. Vivienne, I did not know that. She believed him. Marcus Ashcroft had spent 72 years being many things. Strategic, occasionally ruthless, in the way that lawyers who work adjacent to complicated money have to be. But he had never lied to her in 40 years of being her family's most reliable fixed point. She believed him because she had learned, across 9 years of building something that required her to know the difference, exactly what his voice sounded like when he was telling the truth. Then we have a gap in what we know, she said, and I'm going to go fill it. Vivienne. His voice shifted. The uncle's voice now, not the attorney's. Don't go to that meeting alone. I'm not going alone. Who are you taking? Catherine. A pause. Catherine has been managing the most sensitive information in this operation for 9 years without a single breach, Vivienne said. She's the person I trust most. She's coming. Marcus said nothing for a moment, then, call me from the car when you're leaving the meeting. If I don't hear from you by noon, I'm calling the number we agreed on. The number they had agreed on was a federal contact, not the same inquiry that had processed Storage Unit 7, but a separate arrangement, a different layer of the architecture that Vivienne had built with the understanding that the federal government was not her enemy, but a tool, and like all tools, its usefulness depended on knowing which one to pick up and when. Noon, she said. I'll call you. She ended the call. Catherine, in the front seat beside the driver, turned halfway around. She had a compact in her coat pocket. The woman ran on efficiency and preparedness, and her expression was the focused calm of someone who had already sorted the next 3 hours into categories and was now simply executing. The address is a restaurant in Midtown, Catherine said. Closed on Wednesday mornings. Vincent Greco has a relationship with the owner. Of course he does, Vivienne said. I ran him this morning, after the photograph. Catherine handed her a folded sheet of paper, printed, not digital, because Catherine had long since made her peace with the reality that printed information was harder to intercept and easier to destroy. Born 1963, entered the Moretti organization in his early 30s through a connection on the West Side. No federal record, no state charges. He has been, on paper, a financial consultant for 22 years. Financial consultant, Vivienne said. He files taxes, Catherine said. He owns a co-op in Riverside Heights. He has a daughter at Penn State who wants to be a pediatric nurse. She paused. He has, by all available documentation, been a completely ordinary man. The most dangerous kind, Vivienne said. The car moved north. The restaurant was called Faustino's, which Vivienne thought was either appropriately named or a coincidence, and she had stopped believing in coincidences somewhere around year 6 of her marriage. It was a narrow Italian place on a side street with dark wood paneling and photographs on the walls of people who had eaten there over decades. Senators, boxers, a few faces she recognized from the kinds of events where recognized faces appeared. The kind of place that had survived 50 years because the right people wanted it to survive. The front door was unlocked. Inside, Vincent Greco was sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee and the particular stillness of a man who has been waiting and has practiced making waiting look like comfort. He was older in person than she had registered across dinner tables and event corridors. Or maybe she was seeing him differently now, seeing him without the frame of Dante's consigliere around him. Without that frame, he was simply a man in his early 60s with tired eyes and a good jacket and the hands of someone who had spent years doing work that required him to be careful with his hands. He stood when she came in. Ms. Ashcroft. He gestured to the seat across from him. Vivian sat. Catherine remained standing near the door, which they had both understood without discussing. It was where Catherine would remain. Coffee? Vincent asked. No, Vivian said. He sat back down. He looked at her directly, which she noticed. Many people found it difficult to look at her directly, which she had always found more telling than the ones who managed it. Vincent Greco looked at her the way someone looks at another person when they have decided to stop performing and are communicating that they have decided this. You know, I've been feeding information to your uncle's network, he said. Yes. For 3 years. I know. Then you know the quality of what I provided. He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. Not drinking, just holding. The gesture of a man who needs something solid to hold on to while he talks. The Delancey warrant was possible because of routing information I passed 14 months ago. The financial mapping of the Meridian structure. The documentation that let your lawyers file the Ashcroft trust claims that came from records I accessed and transferred. I'm aware, Vivian said. You've been useful. I've been essential, Vincent said, without heat. Just accuracy. And I want you to know that I know the difference between those two things, because I need you to understand what I'm bringing you today and take it at full value. Vivian looked at him. Mickey Farrow has people watching Thomas Ruiz. He has 2 men on Ruiz's street. They've been there since 10 p.m. last night. Vincent met her eyes. Mickey doesn't know what's in Storage Unit 7. He knows it exists, and he knows it went federal, and he knows Dante is terrified of it in a way that goes beyond financial exposure. That's enough for Mickey. He doesn't need the details. He needs leverage, and Ruiz is adjacent to the leverage. And what does Mickey want with me? He wants the asset structure, Vincent said. 63% of the operational foundation. He wants to fold it into a new arrangement, his arrangement, and he wants you to either participate as a silent financial partner or remove yourself entirely from the landscape. Remove myself. His word was step back. Vincent's jaw tightened slightly. Mickey Farrow is not a subtle man. He is a practical one. He does not want to create problems he doesn't have to create, but he will create them. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She looked at the table between them, the coffee cup, the plain white surface of the restaurant's morning emptiness, the kind of setting that was so aggressively neutral it felt almost dishonest. What is it you want, Mr. Greco? She said. Specifically. I want out, he said. Clean. I want documentation that positions me as a cooperative source in the federal inquiry. Not a defendant, not a person of interest, a source. I want my daughter's name entirely outside of anything connected to the Moretti organization or the Ashcroft legal proceedings. And I want relocation assistance. Nothing elaborate. I have money. I just need the federal paperwork that makes a new location viable. That's a significant ask. I'm offering you Mickey Farrow, Vincent said. Everything he's planning, every conversation he's had in the past 6 months about the post-Moretti structure. Every name, every arrangement, every piece of operational information I have access to. He paused. And I'm offering you Thomas Ruiz. I can get Ruiz out of Yonkers before Mickey's people decide to use him. Vivian looked at him steadily. Why would you be able to do that? Because Mickey Farrow trusts me, Vincent said. He trusts me because I spent 3 years being Dante's consigliere and a year feeding information to your uncle's network and 6 months having dinner with Mickey, and in all of that time nobody has caught me doing more than one thing at once. Until now, Vivian said. Until now, he agreed, because I chose to be caught. By you, specifically. The restaurant was very quiet. Somewhere in the kitchen, a pipe made a settling sound, the kind of sound old buildings make in the morning. "Give me an hour," Vivian said. She stood up. Vincent nodded. He picked up his coffee cup. He did not look like a man who was uncertain about the outcome. He looked like a man who has made his best move and is now waiting for the board to respond, which was either confidence or very good performance, and Vivian had not yet determined which. She walked to the front of the restaurant where Catherine was standing. "Get Marcus on the phone," she said quietly, "and get the federal contact, not the inquiry team, the other one, the one we haven't used yet." Catherine was already dialing. Across the city, as the 44th floor office, Dante Moretti had made a decision. It was not a good decision. He knew it was not a good decision in the way that you know certain things about yourself in the low hours of a crisis, clearly, coldly, without the usual buffer of ego that makes bad decisions feel like bold ones. But it was the only decision available to a man who had spent the morning watching the exits close one by one and had found, to his considerable discomfort, that the only door still open was the one he had sworn 30 years ago he would never walk through. He called Mickey Farrow. Mickey picked up on the first ring. "Boss," Mickey said. The word was a performance. They both knew it. "Don't," Dante said. "We're past that." A pause. Mickey Farrow was 63 years old and had survived 4 decades in the organized crime ecosystem of the American Northeast through a combination of patience, practical intelligence, and the ability to read when a situation had changed and act accordingly before others did. He was not, despite his reputation for bluntness, a stupid man. "All right," Mickey said. "What do you want, Dante?" "I want to know what you're planning." "Planning is a strong word." "Don't do that either," Dante said. "I know about the call yesterday. I know about Yonkers. And I know you've been talking to Vincent, who I am going to address separately at a time of my choosing." He paused. "Tell me what you want." A longer pause. Then Mickey made a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sigh. "What I want," he said, "is for the organization to still be standing in 6 months, which means I want the asset problem solved, which means I want a conversation with your wife." "She's not my wife anymore," Dante said. The words came out without preparation and sat in the air sounding more true than he'd expected. "She's the woman who controls the money," Mickey said. "I don't care what you call her." "If you go near Vivian—" "I'm not going near anyone," Mickey said, with the patience of someone explaining something they've explained before. "I'm having a business conversation." "I had a business conversation with a man in Yonkers last night. Thomas Ruiz. Did you know Thomas Ruiz still lives in the same house he bought in 1987? Same street, same neighbors, same routine. Man is a creature of habit." Dante's hand tightened on the phone. "Don't," Dante said. "I haven't done anything," Mickey said. "I've had a conversation. I've been very polite. Thomas Ruiz made me coffee." A pause. "He's a nice man, Dante. I'd like him to stay that way." "This is a mistake," Dante said. "Maybe," Mickey said, "but it's my mistake to make, unless you have a better option." Dante looked at the window, the gray morning, the city. "I need 48 hours, Dante said. "You said that to Carlo last night," Mickey said. "Carlo told me this morning, I'm not giving you 48 hours. I'm giving you until tonight, 6 p.m. You or the woman, I don't care which one, but someone with authority over those assets calls me by 6 p.m. or Thomas Ruiz becomes a very complicated situation." The call ended. Dante set the phone on the desk. He sat for a moment with the specific quality of stillness that comes just before something breaks. Not a dramatic stillness, not a movie stillness, but the ordinary human stillness of a man who is running out of time and knows it, and is taking 5 seconds to be honest with himself about what that means. Then he picked the phone back up. He called a number he had not called in 6 years. It rang twice. "Vivian," he said when she answered, a pause on her end. Brief. Controlled. "Dante." Her voice gave him nothing. He had always respected that about her, even when he hadn't been paying attention to it. "We need to meet," he said. "I don't think—" "Mickey Farrow has people with Thomas Ruiz," Dante said. "I just got off the phone with him. He's given us until 6 p.m. Another pause. Longer. "Where are you?" she said. "My office." "Stay there," Vivian said. "I'm coming to you. She arrived at 11:43 with Catherine and without announcement, which the lobby security facilitated, because Vivian Ashcroft's name was still on the building's authorized access list. An oversight that Dante's assistant had not yet remedied, perhaps because no one had thought to check, or perhaps because some part of the machinery that supported Dante Moretti's operation was already beginning to make calculations about what came next. The elevator opened directly into the reception area of the 44th floor. Dante was standing in the doorway of his office. They looked at each other across the reception area for a moment. 10 feet of commercial carpeting and 23 years of marriage between them, and the specific charge of two people who know each other better than almost anyone and have arrived at a point where that knowledge is a weapon, and neither of them is entirely sure who's holding it. "Come in," Dante said. Vivian walked in. Catherine remained in the reception area. Dante's assistant, a young man who had been with him for 2 years and was learning, this morning, a great deal about the gap between what a job looks like and what it actually is, found something very important to do at his desk. Dante's office in the daytime was different from the night before. The rain was gone. The morning light came in flat and honest and made the space look exactly like what it was. A room where a man had run an empire, now in the process of becoming a room where a man used to run one. Vivian sat in one of the chairs across from the desk. She did not wait to be invited. Dante sat behind the desk. Between them, the surface where he had spent 30 years conducting business, signing documents, receiving loyalty and dispensing consequences, nothing, just wood and light. "You called Leonard Hatch last night," Vivian said. He looked at her. "How do you—" "I know because I've spent 9 years knowing things you didn't know I knew," she said. Not with anger, just with the flatness of a fact. "He told you he couldn't help you, because we have documentation connecting him to 2 of the problems he solved for you." "You turned Leonard Hatch," Dante said. "I didn't turn anyone," Vivian said. "I showed people where they stood legally and gave them the opportunity to make a better decision. Some of them took it." "And Vincent?" "Vincent came to me," she said. "This morning, voluntarily." Dante pressed both palms flat on the desk. His jaw was tight. "He's been feeding you information for 3 years." "Yes." "Through Marcus." "Yes." "And you—" He stopped, started again. "How much of what I thought was mine was actually— How long have you been—" He stopped again. He looked for a moment genuinely unable to complete a sentence, which was, Vivian thought, probably what it felt like to look directly at the full scope of something you had refused to see for 9 years. "Long enough," she said. "Dante, Mickey Farrow is the problem in front of us right now, not our history." "Our history created Mickey Farrow," Dante said. "Our history created a lot of things," she said. "We can talk about that another time. Right now I need to know exactly what Thomas Ruiz knows about Storage Unit 7 and what exposure that creates if Mickey uses him." Dante looked at her. The look was hard to read, which was unusual. Dante Moretti's expressions had always been controlled but legible. The controlled legibility of a man who chooses carefully what he shows, which meant what he showed was intentional. This look was different. This was the look of a man who is deciding, in real time, how much truth he can afford to give to someone he both needs and cannot fully trust, and who is finding the calculation more difficult than expected because the person across from him is the only one in the room with a viable path forward. "Ruiz was present," Dante said carefully, "for something that happened in 2019, something that I have managed very carefully since then. And what's in Unit 7 documents that something. Yes. Does Ruiz know the documentation existed?" "He didn't know I kept it," Dante said. "Nobody knew." "Then why did you keep it?" Vivian said. A long pause. "Insurance," Dante said. Vivian looked at him. "Against whom?" He said nothing. Nothing. "Dante." Her voice sharpened. "If there's someone else involved in what Ruiz witnessed, and that person is still in play, and Mickey Farrow is now adjacent to Ruiz, I need to know who it is right now." Dante's jaw moved. He looked at the desk. He looked at his hands. "It doesn't matter," he said. "It's handled." "Nothing is handled," Vivian said, with a precision that cut clean. "Look around this office and tell me something is handled." He looked up at her. Something in his face shifted. Not surrender, not yet, but the closest thing to it that Dante Moretti's face had produced in 40 years of refusing to surrender to anything. It was Mickey, he said. The 2019 situation. Ruiz was present. Mickey was involved. I kept the documentation because Mickey has always been the most likely person to move against me if he thought the conditions were right. A pause. The conditions are right. The room was absolutely still. Vivienne processed this in the way she processed everything, quickly, without visible reaction, sorting it into its implications with the efficiency of someone who has spent 9 years training herself to receive difficult information without allowing the difficulty to interfere with the response. Mickey Farrow was not simply using Thomas Ruiz as leverage. Mickey Farrow was removing the witness to his own exposure. He didn't know about the documentation in Storage Unit 7 specifically, but he knew that the federal action on Delancey had moved something connected to 2019, and he was moving to eliminate the one living person who could connect him to it. Mickey doesn't know the documentation is already in federal hands, Vivienne said. No. He thinks he can neutralize his exposure through Ruiz. Yes. Which means he will move on Ruiz, she said, not to use him as leverage against us, to make him unavailable as a witness. Dante's silence confirmed it. Vivienne stood up. She walked to the window. The same window Dante had stood at through the night. She looked at the city and thought faster than she had needed to think in months. The particular high-velocity clarity that comes when the situation has collapsed all the extra space around it and left only the essential problem. Thomas Ruiz needed to be moved. The federal contact needed to be activated. Not the inquiry team, the other one, the one they hadn't used, the one that could move a cooperative witness into protective custody within hours if the predicate was established. Vincent Greco needed to stay in place with Mickey Farrow long enough to confirm the timeline. And Dante Moretti, she turned and looked at him across the office. Dante Moretti needed to sign something. Today. Now. Before 6 p.m. when Mickey Farrow expected a call that was not going to come in the form he expected. I need you to do something, she said. He looked at her warily. What? I need you to call Patricia Sewell and authorize her to speak directly with my federal contact, not the inquiry team. A different channel. She met his eyes. And then I need you to sign the divorce papers. Today. Right now, in this office, before anything else moves. The look on Dante Moretti's face was something she had not seen in 23 years of knowing him. It was the look of a man who has run out of moves except for the one he never wanted to make. A man who is holding the last card in a hand that he knows has already lost, and who is being asked to lay it down voluntarily before someone else takes it from him. If I sign, he said very quietly, what happens to Storage Unit 7? Storage Unit 7 is already in federal hands, she said. You can't bargain with it, but how you cooperate from this point forward affects how the inquiry proceeds and who sits at the defendant table when it does. She paused. Patricia knows that. She'll tell you the same thing I'm telling you. And Mickey. Mickey will be handled, Vivienne said. That's not your problem anymore. You're going to use Vincent to... I said it's not your problem anymore, she said. Not cruelly, just with the finality of someone closing a file. Dante looked at her for a long time. He looked at the woman he had married 23 years ago, believing she was one thing, and who had spent 23 years being something else entirely, something larger and more patient and more dangerous than anything he had built, because what she had built was invisible, and what he had built was a target. He reached for the phone. He called Patricia Sewell. Patricia arrived 18 minutes later with the divorce documents in her briefcase, the same briefcase she'd had for 20 years, because Patricia Sewell, like Vivienne Ashcroft, had learned the value of being prepared for the moment when the moment arrived, not after. The papers were set on the desk. Patricia laid out the relevant sections with the efficient economy of someone who does not believe in prolonging necessary pain. She explained what each signature covered. She answered Dante's questions with the flat accuracy of a professional who has made peace with the fact that the best service she can provide right now is information, not comfort. Dante listened. He asked 4 questions. Then he picked up the pen. His hand, Vivienne noticed, was steady. Whatever else Dante Moretti was, he was not a man who shook when the moment required stillness. She had always known that about him. It was one of the things she had once found compelling about him, and had later understood was just another form of refusal. The refusal to let the outside world see the inside costs. He signed. 3 places. His full signature, not a scrawl. The careful, legible signature of a man who understood that this particular document was going to be read by people he didn't know, for purposes he couldn't control, for years he wouldn't be present for. He set the pen down. He did not look at Vivian when he did it. She picked up the documents. She passed them to Catherine, who had appeared in the doorway with the precise timing of someone who has been listening and knows her role in the sequence. "Your federal contact," Patricia said to Vivian. "You said a different channel." "Catherine has the number," Vivian said. "Tell them witness protection predicate for Thomas Ruiz, Yonkers, imminent. They'll know what that means." Patricia looked at her with the expression of a woman who has spent 38 years believing she had seen every configuration of a situation and is revising that belief slightly. "You built a federal relationship outside the inquiry." "Several, actually," Vivian said. Patricia almost smiled. Almost. "All right," she said, and went to make the call. In the office, for a moment, it was just Dante and Vivian. She was standing near the window. He was sitting at his desk. The signed papers were gone. The pen was still on the desk where he had set it. "Why didn't you just—" He stopped. "You had everything. You could have just handed it all to the federal inquiry 2 years ago and walked away." Vivian looked at him. "Because walking away wasn't the point," she said. "Then what was?" She was quiet for a moment. "There's a difference," she said finally, "between destroying something and replacing it. I wasn't interested in destroying you. I was interested in building something that didn't have you at the center of it." He sat with that. "The foundation," he said. "The foundation. The investments. 300 ventures in the first year. People who were overlooked because they didn't look like the people who usually get looked at." She paused. "That takes capital. It takes structural legitimacy. It takes the kind of credibility that doesn't come from nowhere." She met his eyes. "Some of it came from the work I did inside your operation for 9 years. That's true. And I'm not going to pretend otherwise." "You used my money to fund my replacement," Dante said. "I used the money I controlled to build something real," she said. "What you did with your portion of it is your own accounting." The phone on Dante's desk buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize, similar format to the text last night, the unknown number warning system that had been tracking him since the Gala. He picked it up and read it. Then he looked up at Vivian. "Mickey Farrow just left his apartment," he said. "He's moving." Vivian's hand was already on her phone. She called Vincent Greco. He picked up in one ring. "He's moving," she said. "How long before he reaches Yonkers?" 40 minutes, Vincent said. "Maybe less." "He took 2 people with him." "The federal contact is making the call on Ruiz right now," she said. "I need you to slow Mickey down. Whatever you have. A reason for him to stop, to make a call, to take a different route. 30 minutes. "I can give you 20, Vincent said. "Then give me 20, she said. She ended the call and looked at Catherine. "Are they moving on Ruiz?" "They have a team in Yonkers," Catherine said from the doorway. 8 minutes out. 8 minutes. 20 from Vincent. 8 minutes was enough. Unless something went wrong, and things were going wrong today with a frequency that Vivian had not accounted for, because she had built a plan for one kind of day and was living through a different kind, the kind that doesn't care about plans, the kind that eats careful preparation and spits out improvisation and demands that you be faster and harder and more willing to accept loss than you thought you were. She looked at Dante. I was looking at his phone, at the text, at the unknown number that had been tracking events with a precision that suggested someone very close to Mickey Farrow was watching and reporting. He looked up. "Who's sending these?" Vivian said. Dante looked at her for a moment. Then he said a name she hadn't expected, and the ground moved again, in the way it had been moving since last night, the way it moves when you think you have found the bottom of a situation and there is still further to fall, and the only thing that is left to do is fall faster than whatever is falling toward you. The name Dante said was Ray Costello. Vivian looked at him. "Ray," she said. Not a question. Just the word, held up to the light. "He's been with me 17 years, Dante said. He said it the way you say something that used to mean one thing and now means something else, and the transition happened without your permission. He called me last night about the Delancey paperwork. He was the first one to tell me about the Meridian documentation." He paused. "He was also the first one who knew I was going to the Gala last night. The only one outside this office who knew which exit I'd use. Vivian processed this in the 3 seconds it took Catherine to reappear in the doorway with her phone pressed to her chest and an expression that said something had changed. The federal team in Yonkers, Catherine said. They have Ruiz. He's out. He's safe. The breath that moved through Vivian's chest was not audible. She had trained herself out of audible relief years ago because audible relief announced where your fear had been. But it moved through her, warm and physical and real, the breath of someone who has been holding something very heavy and has just been told they can set it down. Good, she said. She looked back at Dante. Ray Costello has been your source of information about Mickey's movements. I think so, yes. Which means Ray knew about Yonkers before you did. Yes. And told you at... She stopped. Thought. He texted you the warning about Storage Unit 7 last night, from the unknown number. Dante's jaw shifted. He was managing both sides, keeping me functional enough to be useful while Mickey positioned. He needed you scared but operational, Vivian said. A panicked Dante calls Patricia. A panicked Dante signs documents. A panicked Dante is easier to predict. She looked at him. Did you call Ray after you spoke with Mickey this morning? Dante's face did something complicated. I told him Mickey was moving. Then Mickey knows we know, Vivian said. She was already moving. Not running, she did not run, but moving with the kind of velocity that looks like calm from a distance and is something else entirely up close. She picked up her bag from the chair where she'd set it and turned to Catherine. Get Vincent back, she said. Now. Catherine dialed. Vincent picked up and under a ring this time, which meant he was waiting, which meant he already knew something had shifted. Ray Costello, Vivian said. He's been feeding Mickey from inside Dante's operation. A pause that lasted exactly long enough for Vincent Greco to absorb that information and fit it into the picture he had been building for 6 months. That explains the timing yesterday, Vincent said. His voice had gone quiet. Not frightened, just the quiet of someone recalculating. The call between the captains. Mickey knew about the Ashcroft Trust documentation before the Gala. I thought it came from a legal network leak. But if Ray had the Delancey information, he had everything, Vivian said. He's been Mickey's architecture inside Dante's house. Then Mickey doesn't need me anymore, Vincent said. 3 words. Flat. Vincent Greco had just understood something about his own position that rearranged it considerably, and he had said it out loud with the steadiness of a man who has been in dangerous terrain long enough to assess new danger without falling apart in front of it. Where are you right now? Vivian said. 2 blocks from my apartment. Don't go home, she said. Go to the federal contact number Catherine gives you. Tell them your name, tell them you're ready to formalize the cooperation agreement, and tell them you have active intelligence on a witness intimidation situation in Yonkers that has just been resolved by federal protective custody. They'll know what to do with you. And Mickey, Vincent said. Mickey is going to find out in the next few minutes that Ruiz is gone, Vivian said. He's going to be looking for someone to explain why. You need to be somewhere that isn't accessible when that happens. Vincent was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're good at this. Go, she said. She ended the call. She looked at Dante, who had not moved from behind his desk. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on his face in 23 years. Not quite admiration, not exactly, because admiration implies that the thing being admired is a surprise, and what she saw on his face was something more complicated. The expression of a man who has just watched someone do, at speed and under pressure, what he spent 30 years believing only he could do. Ray is going to run, Dante said. Yes, Vivian said. Can you stop him? She looked at him. That's not my problem to solve. It's mine, he said. It was yours, she said. You signed the papers, Dante. The problems that belong to your operation are Patricia's problems now, and the federal inquiry's problems, not mine. He sat with that. Where does that leave me? He said. It was the most naked question she had heard from him in 23 years. No performance in it, no calculation. Just a man in an office at 11:50-something in the morning asking a woman he had underestimated for a decade where he stood on the map of what came next. Vivian picked up her bag. Alive, she said, which is more than Mickey was planning for either of us by the end of the week. She moved toward the door. Patricia will guide you through what comes next legally. Cooperate fully. Don't lie to her and don't lie to the inquiry team. You're not going to get clean. What's in Storage Unit 7 means that. But there's a difference between a man who cooperates and a man who doesn't, and that difference is measured in years. She stopped at the door. She looked back at him once. It was not the look from the podium, the steady 2-second look of someone who has finally been seen and no longer needs anything. This was a different look, quieter. The look of a woman who has carried a very long story to its ending and is standing at the last page and finding that endings, even the ones you wrote yourself, are not entirely what you imagined when you were in the middle of building toward them. Dante, she said. He looked at her. I didn't hate you, she said. I want you to know that. I was angry for a long time. But it wasn't hate. She paused. You just never looked. That was the whole thing. You just never looked. She walked out. Mickey Farrow found out about Ruiz at 12:17 p.m. via a call from one of the two men he'd sent to Yonkers, who reported that the row house on Prescott Street was empty. The front door was locked. The neighbor said a gray sedan had come and gone with Ruiz in it 40 minutes earlier, and there was a federal seal notice on the door. Mickey stood in his car on the FDR Drive and listened to this information and said nothing for a full 30 seconds. Then he said, "Where's Ray?" The man in Yonkers didn't know where Ray was. Mickey called Ray. Ray didn't pick up. Mickey called Ray 3 more times in the next 4 minutes. No answer. He sat in his car with the FDR traffic moving around him and thought about the past 18 months. The conversations with Vincent, the careful accumulation of leverage, the positioning and the patience and the calculations he had made about when the Moretti organization was weak enough to restructure under new management. He had been methodical. He had not rushed. He had waited until the conditions were right, and then he had moved. He thought about Ray Costello, who had been his mechanism inside Dante's operation for 2 years, who had been useful and reliable, and had cost him a specific ongoing arrangement that Mickey had considered reasonable overhead for the access it provided. He thought about the fact that Ray wasn't answering his phone. He thought about Vivian Ashcroft. He had made an assessment of Vivian Ashcroft based on what he knew, which was what he had seen and what Ray had told him. He had assessed her as a woman who was executing a legal and financial strategy, sophisticated, well-resourced, but ultimately operating in a domain that didn't overlap with his. She was unwinding an empire. I was positioning to inherit the operational pieces that remained. He had not assessed her as someone who would have a federal contact outside the inquiry, a separate channel, something already in place, already warm, already capable of moving a witness out of a row house in Yonkers in under 10 minutes. He had underestimated her. He recognized this in his car on the FDR Drive, with the clarity that comes when a situation has removed all the comfortable interpretations and left only the accurate one. He called his lawyer. Ray Costello was found by federal agents at Newark Liberty Airport at 2:14 p.m., attempting to board a flight to Lisbon under his own name, which was the decision of a man who had prepared a contingency exit but had prepared it in calmer times and had not updated it for a morning that moved this fast. He was detained without incident. He sat in a federal holding room and looked at the table in front of him and made the calculation that every man in a holding room eventually makes, the calculation about what he has that the people on the other side of the table want, and whether what he has is worth more as a bargaining chip than as a secret. He decided it was. He asked for immunity. He got cooperation consideration, which is not the same thing but was what was available. He started talking at 3 p.m. He talked about Mickey Farrow for 4 hours. Catherine drove Vivian home, not to the penthouse. Vivian had not thought of the penthouse as home for years, and had moved her personal items to the apartment in the West Village 3 weeks ago in a series of quiet evenings when Dante was traveling, which he frequently was, which was one of the reasons the 3 weeks had been possible. The West Village apartment was smaller, older building, a kitchen with a window that looked into a small courtyard where someone had planted a fig tree that had no business surviving a Manhattan winter and did it anyway every year. She sat in the back of the car and let the city move past and did not think for a while. She gave herself that, the deliberate emptiness of not thinking, which she had learned was not laziness but maintenance, the way you have to let soil rest before it can grow anything worth growing. Catherine, in the front seat, was making and receiving calls with the steady efficiency of someone closing out a complex operation, the legal confirmations, the foundation administrative notifications, The board members who needed to understand that last night's announcement was proceeding on schedule and that certain developments in the past 24 hours were, while significant, not a disruption to the institutional timeline. Vivian listened to Catherine's voice without registering the words and watched a man walking a dog on a side street. A large, unhurried dog of indeterminate breed, moving at the dog's pace, which was slower than the man's pace, and the man was adjusting to it, letting the dog lead, going where the dog went. There was something in this that she could not have explained, but that settled somewhere in her chest with the quality of a thing that is true. She had been moving at someone else's pace for a long time. Not anymore. At 3:45 p.m., Marcus Ashcroft called. She picked up. "Ray Costello is talking," Marcus said. He sounded, for the first time in this conversation that had been ongoing for 24 hours, something approaching relieved. Not happy. Marcus was not a man who defaulted to happiness, but the specific loosening of a person who has been braced for a specific impact and found that it landed differently than expected. "I know," she said. Catherine heard at 3. "Mickey's lawyer has been on the phone with the inquiry team since 2:30, Marcus said. "Mickey is assessing his options." "Mickey doesn't have options," Vivian said. "He has the option to cooperate or the option to not cooperate. That's what he has." "His lawyer seems to be arriving at that same conclusion," Marcus said. A pause. "Vivian." "Yes." "How are you?" The question was simple, and the man asking it was 72 years old and had known her since she was 3, and it was the first time in 24 hours that anyone had asked it. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm tired," she said. "I'm genuinely very tired." "That's appropriate," Marcus said. "Go home. Sleep. The lawyers can handle the rest of today." "There are still—" "The lawyers can handle it," he said, with the gentle firmness of a man who has been saying this to her in various forms across 4 decades. "You built the machine. Let it run." She looked at the fig tree courtyard through the window as the car turned onto her street. "All right," she said. Sienna Vale met with the independent attorney at 9 a.m. the morning after the gala and spent 3 hours in a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in Midtown, being walked through the precise nature of her legal exposure with the careful, patient thoroughness of a woman who had been retained to give Sienna the information she needed, and who delivered it without judgment and without softening it beyond what honesty permitted. The exposure was manageable. It was not nothing. Her name was in documents she hadn't known about, connected to an LLC she hadn't understood the structure of, but she had not signed anything she had understood to be illegal, had not been a knowing participant in anything that would require her to be anything other than a cooperative and fully forthcoming witness. She was going to be fine. She sat with this information for a long time after the attorney finished speaking. Fine was not the same as unchanged. Fine did not mean she was going to walk out of this conference room and back into the life she had been living 14 months ago as if none of it had happened. Fine meant she was going to walk out of this conference room into a life that was going to require her to make different decisions than the ones that had brought her here, and to make them with better information about what she was actually choosing between. She thought about Vivian Ashcroft leaving a business card on a lobby side table and saying, "I'm not helping you," and then doing exactly that. She thought about what it meant to be in a room with someone who had more power than you and choose, for reasons you didn't have to choose, to give you what you needed to protect yourself. She thought about the life she had left in New Jersey and the choices that had seemed at the time like moving toward something. She called her mother from the sidewalk outside the building. Her mother picked up on the second ring, the way her mother always did, the reflexive immediacy of a woman who had been answering her children's calls for 30 years with the same unquestioning readiness. "Sienna," her mother's voice. Ordinary, warm, unburdened by anything except the fact of being her mother. Sienna opened her mouth. She had planned to say something composed, something that would manage the conversation and not alarm anyone and demonstrate that she was handling things. What came out instead was, "Mom, I need to come home for a few days." Her mother said, "I'll make up your room." Sienna stood on the sidewalk in Midtown Manhattan with traffic moving past her in both directions and her eyes stinging in a way she refused to call crying because she was on a public street and thought that sometimes fine was actually a lot. The divorce was finalized in 31 days. Patricia Sewell had called it efficient. The presiding judge had called it straightforward, by which she meant the documentation was exhaustive, and the asset delineation was so thoroughly pre-established that there was almost nothing left for a court to determine. Dante signed the final papers in Patricia's office. Not his own office. Patricia had suggested her office, and he had not objected because there was something in him that understood the old office was for a different version of things, and the new papers required a neutral ground. He signed everything. He cooperated with the federal inquiry fully, beginning the week after the gala, in sessions that lasted through the winter and into the early spring. Patricia was present for every session. She was formidable, and she earned whatever he was paying her, and she managed to construct a cooperation framework that would not keep him out of legal consequence. What was in Storage Unit 7 was what it was, and there was no legal architecture on Earth that made it disappear. But that established the nature and limits of his culpability with enough precision that the outcome, when it came, was something he and Patricia had discussed and for which she had prepared him. He was not going to prison for the rest of his life. He was going to prison. He was going to prison for long enough that Manhattan would be a different city when he came out, and the organization that had borne his name would be so thoroughly dispersed by then that no one in it would have any reason to remember him as anything other than a cautionary illustration. He understood this. On the day Patricia told him the final terms, he sat in her conference room and looked at his hands for a long time. They were the hands of a man approaching 61. The skin looser than it used to be, a scar on the right knuckle from something that had happened in his late 20s that he rarely thought about anymore. He looked at these hands and thought about 30 years of decisions made with them, and he did not arrive at anything so clean as regret. What he arrived at was something more complicated and less flattering. The recognition of a man who made himself the center of his own world for so long that he had genuinely failed to see the other worlds operating at the edges of his. And one of those worlds had been larger and more alive than his had been in years. "There's something I want to do," he said to Patricia. She waited. "I want to write her a letter," he said. "Vivian, not asking for anything, not making a case. I just want—" He stopped. "There are things I should have said while I had the opportunity to say them in person." Patricia looked at him. "I'd recommend you have me review it before you send anything," she said. "Not the content, just to make sure it doesn't create complications." "It won't create complications," he said. "I'm not asking her for anything. I just—" He stopped again. "All right," Patricia said, quietly, more gently than she usually spoke in a professional context. "Write your letter." Vivian received the letter on a Tuesday morning in April. She was in the West Village apartment at the kitchen table with coffee and a foundation report she was reading before a 9 a.m. call, and the letter arrived in the regular mail. A real letter, a physical envelope. Her name in handwriting she recognized without having seen it in years, because handwriting is one of the things the brain files permanently without being asked to. She set the foundation report aside. She opened the envelope. It was 2 pages. Handwritten, not typed. His handwriting was the same as it had always been. Large, slightly cramped, the handwriting of a man who learned to write in a different era and never fully updated the habit. She read it once through without stopping. Then she set it on the table and drank her coffee and looked at the fig tree in the courtyard, which was budding out in the April morning with the cheerful indifference of something that grows because growing is what it does. The letter did not ask for forgiveness. He had been smart enough or honest enough, or Patricia had been thorough enough, that the letter didn't reach for things that weren't available. What it did was describe, plainly, without the self-serving softening that people usually employ when describing their own failures, what he understood now that he hadn't understood then, what he had missed, what it had cost, and who it had cost. He wrote about the night she had asked him, in the 3rd year of their marriage, what she could do that would make him take her seriously. He had told her she was being dramatic. He had said it pleasantly, which had somehow been worse than saying it with contempt. She had gone to bed and he had stayed up watching a financial report and had not thought about the question again. He thought about it now, he wrote. He had thought about it more times in the past 5 months than in the previous 20 years combined. He wrote about Sienna in a single paragraph, not making excuses, not explaining, just acknowledging. I used her to feel something I had stopped feeling, and I should have had the honesty to examine why I had stopped feeling it instead of finding a way to avoid the examination. He wrote, near the end, "You told me you weren't angry with me. I believe you. I am angry with myself, which I suspect is where the anger belonged all along." He closed with, I don't expect anything from this letter. I'm sending it because there are things that are true that I should have said while I had the chance to say them to your face, and this is the version of that I have left. Vivian read it a second time. She did not cry. She had cried for Dante Moretti in the 4th year of their marriage, and again in the 7th, and once more in the 9th. And each time she had cried, she had understood it was the last time, and each time she had been right. There were no more tears for this particular situation. What she felt instead was something more complex and less comfortable than sadness. The feeling of seeing something clearly that you could only see from the distance you had worked very hard to create. She folded the letter. She put it back in its envelope. She put the envelope in the drawer of the kitchen table. The middle drawer, the one she kept for things that were real and that she didn't know what to do with yet and wasn't willing to throw away. She picked up the foundation report. She finished reading it before the 9 a.m. call. The Ashcroft Global Foundation made its first grant disbursements in May. 314 ventures, 41 states, 7 countries. Technology, renewable infrastructure, financial education, health access in communities that had been making do without it for decades. There was a small ceremony at the foundation's new offices. Not a gala, not a Carrington-level production, but a working afternoon with the first cohort of grant recipients and the foundation staff and Marcus and a handful of board members, and Catherine, who stood near the window with coffee and her tablet, and the expression of a person who has been competent under pressure for so long that witnessing something go right has become genuinely moving. Vivian moved through the room. She spoke to a woman from East Baltimore who was building a network of community health navigators in neighborhoods where the closest hospital was 40 minutes away. She spoke to a man from the Central Valley of California who had developed a soil moisture monitoring system that could cut a small farm's water usage by 40%. She spoke to a 23-year-old from the south side of Chicago who had dropped out of college to build a financial literacy curriculum because she had watched her mother fall into debt that a piece of basic information, delivered at the right time, could have prevented. She spoke to all of them with the full weight of her attention, which was the thing she had always had, and had spent years giving to rooms that didn't notice it. These rooms noticed. At the end of the afternoon, Marcus found her near the window where Catherine had been standing. "Your mother would have liked this," he said. Vivian looked at the room. All these people, all these problems being addressed with genuine resources by people who understood the problems from the inside. "Yes," she said. She would have. They stood together quietly for a moment. The comfortable quiet of two people who have known each other for 40 years and don't need to fill the silence with anything except the presence of each other. "What's next?" Marcus said. It was this kind of question he asked, not because he needed an answer, but because he knew she always had one. "Next cohort in September," she said. 400 ventures. We're expanding the international portfolio, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and we're launching the policy advocacy arm in the fall. "That'll create friction," Marcus said. "Good," she said. "Friction means contact. Contact means the work is real." He almost said something that would have been avuncular and warm and slightly cautionary, and she would have appreciated it. Instead, he simply nodded, which was better. 6 months after the gala, a journalist named Priya Mehta, who wrote for a publication that covered the intersection of finance and culture and had been following the Ashcroft story since the night of the Carrington announcement, requested an interview with Vivian. Vivian agreed to 45 minutes in the foundation offices. Priya Mehta was thorough and prepared and asked intelligent questions, and did not ask the questions that lazy journalists asked, which was something Vivian respected. She asked about the foundation's investment thesis. She asked about the policy advocacy arm. She asked about the criteria for the grant selection process and the mechanisms for accountability and the grant disbursements. Near the end of the 45 minutes, she asked the question that Vivian had been waiting for, the one that was somewhere in every conversation about her, the one that was never quite the right question, but it was the closest available approximation of it. How did you go from the public perception of you, which was this quiet philanthropic presence in your husband's orbit, to this? She gestured at the room, at the foundation, at everything it represented. People talk about it as a transformation, as this dramatic change. But you've said before that framing doesn't feel right to you. Vivian looked at her. She thought about the answer. Not to find it, she had always had it, but to decide how much of it was this journalist to have. She decided on all of it. Not because she owed the journalist the full story, but because the full story was actually the simpler one, and simplicity was underrated. I wasn't transformed, she said. I was already this. I've been this since before I was Vivian Moretti, since before I was anyone's wife, since I was a young woman with a trust document my father built for me, and an understanding that the only way to make something real last is to build it on ground that actually belongs to you. She paused. The years inside that marriage were not wasted years. I learned things. I understood things about power and how it operates and what it actually requires versus what it looks like it requires. I had access to information I wouldn't have had otherwise. I used that access. Another pause. And I waited until I could build something that would outlast the thing I was walking away from. That's not transformation. That's patience. That's just knowing what you're building and refusing to start building it before the foundation is ready. Priyameta was quiet for a moment. Do you have regrets? About how long it took? Vivian thought about this honestly. She thought about the years, the galas where she stood beside a man who looked through her, the conversations at dinner tables where she was decorative, the night she asked him to take her seriously and he had said she was being dramatic, and she had gone to bed and lain in the dark with the quiet, absolute certainty that she would not be asking again. She thought about what she had done with those years. No, she said. The time wasn't wasted. It was investment. She looked at Priyameta directly. Everything I built in the time he gave me by not paying attention. If he had paid attention, I'd have had to work differently. Maybe I'd have gotten here anyway, maybe faster, maybe slower. She paused. But I'm here, and what's here is real, and it's mine. Priyameta wrote something down. One more thing, she said, and you can decline this one. Ask it. Dante Moretti is going to prison. The sentencing is next month. Is there anything you want to say? Not for the record necessarily. Just, for the record is fine, Vivian said. She was quiet for a moment. He wasn't a monster, she said. People want him to be a monster because it's simpler. He was a man who made a set of choices, and each choice made the next one easier until the choices were who he was. She looked at the window, at the city beyond it. He was also a man who was capable of more than he ended up being, and he never examined that gap because examining it would have required him to look at himself honestly, and he didn't. She paused. That's the actual tragedy of him. Not the crime, not the consequences. The fact that he had the capacity for something more than he built, and he chose not to use it, and I don't think he understood what that cost him until it was entirely too late. Priyameta set down her pen. Off the record, she said. Was any of it? She stopped. Did any of it? It was real, Vivian said. At the beginning. She let that sit for a moment. I loved him. And then I stopped, and then I survived the stopping, and then I built something. That's the whole story. She stood up. Priyameta stood too. They shook hands at the door of the foundation office, and Vivian watched the journalist walk toward the elevator. And then she turned back into the room where her work was, where the people doing things that mattered were moving and talking and occasionally arguing in the productive way of people who are genuinely invested in getting something right. She went back to her desk. She had a call in 8 minutes, an afternoon full of work that was hers to do, and a drawer in an apartment on the west side with a letter in it that she had not yet decided whether to answer. She thought she might. Not soon. Not in the shape of forgiveness, which was not a shape she owed to anyone, or explanation, which he didn't need. Maybe something simpler than that. Maybe just the acknowledgement that she had read it, and that some of what he said was true, and that true things deserve to be received even when receiving them costs something. Or maybe she would leave it in the drawer. She hadn't decided. She thought there was something honest in not having decided, something that was hers to hold without resolving, the way some things just are. She picked up her coffee. She got back to work. Outside, the city moved at its permanent, indifferent, relentless pace. The fig tree in the courtyard of her building was in full leaf now, green and extravagant and entirely unconcerned with what it had cost to get there. It had simply grown, because that was what it did, because that was what it had always done. And no one had